Miss Eleanor Leonard was born on the 21st of August 1849 in Hobart, Tasmania. Although it was said she was born in the Canary Islands and lived in England until the age of 10 before coming to Australia, this is not borne out by official records. Her father James was a soldier in the 99th Regiment, which escorted convict ships out to Tasmania in the 1840s, before taking part in the Maori Wars in New Zealand between 1845 and 1847. The regiment was stationed in Tasmania from 1848 until 1856. When it departed, 400 men transferred to other regiments and stayed behind, many settling permanently. James Leonard and his wife Sarah remained in Tasmania with their daughter. James died in the late 19th century. When she was young, Eleanor had worked at Perkins' Emporium in Liverpool Street, Hobart. The building was eventually demolished and a theatre built on the site in 1916. Sarah and Eleanor originally lived in a small cottage adjoining a neighbouring house before Mrs. Leonard had a 4-room cottage built at 26 Eleanor Place, a dead-end street off Star Street in Sandy Bay. Here they lived together until Sarah Leonard died on the 30th of December 1909, after which Eleanor lived alone, except for occasions when she let a room. She had been friends with William Stride and his family since about 1893. They had even invited Miss Leonard to come and live with them not long before April 1933, but she chose to retain her independence. At the age of 83, she was still active and enjoyed good health. Miss Leonard regularly attended church at St David's Cathedral with her cousin Lucy St Clair, who was in her late 80s. Other than visiting her friends, the Stride family, each Sunday, she was a retiring woman who kept to herself. She used to walk the mile distance to the Strides, despite her age. Said to have been the essence of good nature, Miss Leonard was of a kindly and generous disposition, who would often give handouts to men who called at the house, this being the depths of the Great Depression in Australia. Some men would arrive in the twilight and refuse to leave until she gave them something. Being very short-sighted, she was sometimes nervous of these beggars. It was known that she had twice recently allowed a strange man into her house and given him something to drink. The second time she got confused, and instead of mixing a fizzy powder, mixed a milk powder for him. The man accepted it, saying he was so thirsty he'd drink anything. In retrospect, it was speculated he may have been checking the house to confirm Miss Leonard lived alone. On the evening of Easter Sunday, the 16th of April 1933, Miss Leonard had visited the Stride family at their home at 49 Frederick Street, West Hobart, between 8 and 8:30 p.m. Clarice Daisy Stride, who had known the old lady all of her life, escorted her home and stopped for about an hour with her. On the morning of the 18th of April 1933, a jug was left on the ledge of the kitchen window, which the milkman, Christopher Bender, filled with milk. Eleanor left the external door to the glassed-in veranda open or unlocked to allow for this. The next day he noticed that the milk had not been taken in. He left another can beside the jug, but mentioned it to a neighbour, Thomas Smallhorn. The milkman, who had been delivering milk for about a year, had not seen Miss Leonard for some months, but it was unusual she had not taken her milk inside. Smallhorn often visited Miss Leonard, due to her age, to watch over her. He asked his niece to go and see if she was all right. The niece went as far as the back door, but some sixth sense made her hesitate to go any further. She returned and told her uncle she felt something was wrong, so he went over to the house and went through the enclosed veranda, opened the door, and entered into the sitting room beyond. He saw a woman dressed in her underskirt and a cardigan jacket, apparently asleep on the floor. A green tablecloth was draped over the woman's face, and he lifted it. He knew by the cardigan that he had often seen her wearing that it was Eleanor Leonard. He could not identify his friend by her face, for she had been battered so brutally that she was all but unrecognisable. The face was swollen to 2 to 3 times its normal size, and seemed entirely covered in blood. It was, he said, a sight he would never forget. Dazed by the discovery, his gaze wandered around the room, and he saw that it was in a state of total disarray. Chairs had been overturned, the table upset, drawers pulled out, and the contents spilled on the floor. Blood was splashed all over the floor. Even a picture had been pulled down from the wall. It was thought she would have only had a few shillings, or £3 at most, in money at home. Her income was mostly derived from shares she held in the Electrolytic Zinc Company of Australasia Limited and Nestle's and Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company Limited. Smallhorn went and phoned the police, and then remembered that a Constable Absalom lived nearby, so went to see him. When police arrived at the scene, the murder weapon was found quickly, laying discarded nearby. A piece of wood 15 inches long and 3 by 2 inches in thickness had been used to batter the old lady's head to a pulp. It had been taken from a pile of firewood by the side of the house. In reconstructing the crime, it was believed the assailant had armed himself with the wood, then knocked on the door. When Miss Leonard answered, she was struck and forced back through the small scullery and into the lounge room, where she fell to the floor. While unconscious, the attacker turned the room over looking for money or other valuables. While he was doing so, Miss Leonard revived and was struck again with deadly ferocity. Perhaps in frustration that nothing was found worth stealing, the helpless victim was not only bashed, but also stabbed 13 times, on both sides of the neck, under the left eye and under the right temple. There were also 3 lacerations on the front of her head. One of the stabbings had broken her lower jaw. Her fingers and hands were badly bruised trying to protect herself. There was evidence of the body being dragged across the floor. Outside the house, the upper plate of her false teeth was found beside a drain near the veranda door. As she had been in the habit of providing charity to men who called at the house, and because of the tumult the house was in, robbery was considered the most likely motive. Suspicious characters were known to have been loitering in the neighbourhood. Miss Leonard had warned Miss Stride to be careful her wallet wasn't snatched when she was walking home. One night she and a young man visited the old lady, and some men loitering nearby, keeping their faces down to hide their features, were seen. So suspicious of them was he that the young man kept going outside to check that they had not stolen his car. The nearest neighbour to Miss Leonard was a fellow octogenarian, Mr. Farr, who was 82 years old. He had not seen or heard anything untoward, but recalled that 3 years earlier he had been attacked by a stranger when he answered a knock on his door. When Farr shouted for the police, the man fled and was never caught. Her neighbour across the road was a solicitor named Ellis Cox, who was away for the Easter holidays. Then the medical examination which was made upon Miss Leonard's body revealed a further shocking twist. She had been raped and strangled, in addition to the other violence perpetrated upon her. The force applied had broken bones in her neck. The estimated time of the murder was between 2 and 8 p.m. on the 17th of April. At about 10 a.m. on the 18th of April, the morning following the murder, a Mrs. Ida Price was walking across the domain near the cricket ground when she found a bundle of clothing near the entrance. She handed her find to the caretaker, who contacted police. With the clothing were gloves, stockings, shoes, 2 pairs of spectacles, a mirror, an oval gold brooch, and a manicure set. These articles were identified the next day by Mrs. Stride as having belonged to Miss Leonard. At 5 p.m. on the 20th of April, more of her possessions were found, this time dumped in long grass in a lane at the side of the Avalon Theatre in Hobart. In the parcel were 3 white dinner plates, 4 cups and saucers, a fancy milk jug, and cups. The pattern on the crockery matched other articles at Miss Leonard's home. Police revealed more items were missing, but had not been found. A round raffia brooch, coloured purple and pink, a 2-bar gold brooch set with a large amber topaz, a cup and saucer with moss roses around the edge, and a 6-inch tall clock made of aluminium, with a dial face that had slipped so that the 6 was in the 7's position. Miss Leonard was buried at the Queensborough Cemetery in Sandy Bay on the 21st of April. It was one of the last burials there, as the cemetery closed in 1934. In 1961, the old cemetery was converted into an oval and school, with a few headstones left in a memorial garden on Peel Street. In the early days of the investigation, police were confident of catching the killer. A fingerprint expert, Senior Constable Whittle, checked through the house and located a couple of prints of interest. A young man aged about 26, recently released from the Hobart Hospital, was sought for questioning. He had last been seen in the Claremont area on the 18th of April and was believed to be walking to Launceston, a distance of about 100 miles. Shortly after midnight on Friday the 21st of April, the man was located in Launceston by police. He had left Hobart about 8 a.m. on the 18th of April, walking on the road to Bridgewater. While at Bridgewater, he met another man in a hotel, and they left together at lunchtime on the 19th of April, walking along the main road north to Launceston. This second man was aged about 40 and was 5'6", with fair hair and blue eyes. He said he was a baker by trade and had tattoos on his body of a ship, a harp and thistle, and a chain and heart, which the first man observed as the man was not wearing a shirt. That night they stopped at the residence of a farmer at Mangalore, who agreed to provide some food and a place to sleep the night. They departed on the Thursday morning at daybreak, continuing to trudge along the main road towards Kempton. Near Baghdad, the other man produced a small clock, and saying that he had had an argument with his wife, was going to throw it away. He wrapped it in some newspaper, which had held sandwiches, and threw the parcel into a roadside hedge. It was suspected that the clock stolen from Eleanor Leonard and the one thrown away were the one and the same. The pair parted company near Oatlands, where the younger man got a lift to Launceston. The second man could not be positively traced beyond Oatlands, although it was thought he may have stayed overnight in a cabin at Epping Forest, and then travelled by train or truck into Launceston. The first man was taken back to the Baghdad area to assist police with attempting to find the clock. Police were able to find the newspaper, but not the clock, leading them to believe that somebody had found the clock and taken it. The tattooed man sought by the police, because of the clock, became of even more interest due to being shirtless when travelling, as an extensively blood-stained shirt had been found discarded in a small laneway off Brisbane Street on the 21st of April. There was blood on the chest area, the cuffs, and other places. The man's description was circulated through the press, and when he saw he was wanted, 44-year-old Edward Lawrence made his way to the Launceston police station at about 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, the 22nd of April. Questioned by two detectives, the man was able to satisfy them that the clock and his missing shirt had nothing to do with the murder they were investigating. Although this promising lead had come to naught, police continued to make inquiries. By the 1st of May, however, with their early leads having failed to come to fruition, police admitted they were baffled, but they remained determined to solve the callous murder of the elderly woman. A £250 reward for information was offered on the 18th of May in hopes of bringing forth fresh information. On the same day, Eleanor's will was proved in court. She left the house in Erina Place to a cousin in Melbourne named Alice Garth. Her household furniture and effects went to Clarice Stride. Hopes of solving the case rallied when a 22-year-old Tasmanian man named William Gibson was arrested in Sydney and remanded on the 22nd of May 1933 on a charge of breaking and entering. He was to be returned to Hobart, where police were keen to interrogate him about the Leonard murder. Nothing more was mentioned of him regarding the case, and patently another lead had petered out. The inquest, which had opened soon after the murder, was now, with no sign of a culprit being arrested, concluded on the 31st of August 1933, and with no new information having been uncovered, was brief. In summation, the coroner declared that it was hardly conceivable that the crime had been committed by a sane man. It was, he said, the act of a maniac, a fiend in human form. The crime and its attendant circumstances showed it to be one of the most dastardly ever committed in the state. It had profoundly shocked the community. He found that some person unknown had feloniously, wilfully, and with malice aforethought, murdered Miss Leonard. In extending sympathy to friends of the deceased, the coroner recalled that as a young child he had seen Miss Eleanor Leonard and her mother passing his home. Both were kindly and gentle ladies. The killer who committed the brutal murder and outrage of the kindly old lady was never apprehended, disappearing completely into the dark corners of history.